proof of work is this idea that really kind of took off with Bitcoin. There have been other kind of iterations of it, but the main idea there is that it's really hard to know identities on the internet. There's an arbitrary number of people. People can have as many Reddit accounts, as many Facebook accounts. They can create a ton of Twitter bots and followers. It's really hard to know whether one vote on the internet is actually one person. So this problem of it's called the Sybil resistance problem. How do I actually attribute value to a voice on the internet? It's a very challenging and hard problem, and people have been dealing with this since the birth of the internet, because as soon as there was email, you start getting 1 million emails per day of stuff that you didn't want. and this is what's called spam. And even out of the email research, folks kind of started thinking, well, what if it made it cost a little bit to send one of these messages to actually vote? And one of the ideas they came up with is proof of work, which is I can force you to solve a cryptographic puzzle that takes you some amount of energy to solve, but takes almost no amount of energy for me to verify. So if it takes you like 10 cents of electricity to solve this puzzle, it takes me, 1/1,000,000th of a cent of electricity to verify it. And therefore, I can kind of remove the amount of junk that I'm getting. And some very smart folks that were working in like the cypherpunk movement and working around this idea of self-sovereign money and digital cash, they kind of put all these things together and came up with proof of work and Nakamoto consensus. And it's kind of it's a magical construction, right? It like works so beautifully that it's really hard to it was, to me, not so much invented but discovered, right? It's like one of those things that is very, very clever that seems obvious in retrospect. And the idea there is that we can create security by using this proof of work puzzle and by forcing the vote, or how much anybody in the internet agrees of to be a thing of a certain state. Like for, whether the sky is blue or red, it doesn't matter. But we can all kind of agree that it took 10 kilojoules of electricity to create that voice, to create that vote. And once we have that Sybil resistance, we can all agree on a ledger, right? Like a set of accounts and who has what amounts. And as soon as we have that, we kind of have this idea of financially or economically secure money, because it costs some amount of dollars to go take that electricity and convert it into this puzzle. And this system, I think it was a combination of the 2008 financial crisis and this kind of very clever, easy to work with system that really took off, and Bitcoin kind of came out of this. The really hard problem here is these networks that rely on proof of work, they're communication networks, and communication is like an old school problem. So back in the day, people discovered radio, and they figured out that if two radio towers transmit at the same time over the same frequency, you get noise. So if you have Bitcoin, which relies on this proof of work puzzle to transmit information, if you have enough participants in the network that they all start transmitting information at the same time, you get forks, or effectively you get noise. So the network is in this noisy state where nobody knows what is the actual final state of the ledger. Like, I don't know if the transactions that Greg thinks are the right ones that we should actually encode, or the transactions that Anatoly says are the right ones. If both of us claim to be like, okay, here's my copy of the ledger, and here's my electricity, but if that voice occurs at the same time, we still have to figure out who's right. So to deal with this problem, and like how most random transmission protocols work with, is they force the users to wait and to transmit at a frequency that the likelihood of a collision is really low. So proof of work, this is the difficulty adjustment. So when more voices come into the network and more voices want to vote and select transactions and what actually means that somebody spend money, when that number gets so large, that network adjusts the difficulty or the amount of electricity it takes to create a vote, such that only one vote is created every 10 minutes. 10 minutes is a long time for computers. It's a long time for global networks. You know, it's an incredibly fast amount of time when you're dealing with a banking system. That I can wire you arbitrary sums of money, and it takes 10 minutes, right, for you to receive it. That's crazy, right? And a lot, if you ever bought a house or dealt with any kind of like financial transactions that are interesting, you kind of realize, okay, that takes a day to do with a lot of paperwork. Bitcoin takes 10 minutes to get that signal, right? And it's a bit more complicated than 10 minutes, but effectively, like you get a lot of security just from that one single voice, a single vote. Unfortunately, you know, the world is so big and connected that Bitcoin, while I think phenomenally is proven to work for large transfers between, you know, China and the US. I can send $1 billion and in an hour, you know that you got it. You know, $1 billion with a Bitcoin. It doesn't really work well for very like, you know, small like Venmo style, Visa style transactions or things that like traditional finance does a really good job at, like the New York Stock Exchange. Just simply the amount of data that needs to be transmitted is so large that those 10-minute intervals are just not, are too slow. And Bitcoin can't really be competitive in that sense. And folks at Ethereum that had this vision of a universal computer that can really run arbitrary computation, you can run exchanges in it, you can build lending protocols. They've optimized proof of work, I think, to its maximum limit. And that time frame is shrunk from 10 minutes to 12 and a half seconds. And the result of that, I think, if people have seen, is that there's a massive amount of innovation that happened in Ethereum. I think like phenomenal amount of adoption, considering how difficult it is to understand any of this stuff, how cryptography, how hard it is for normal humans. I think like Ethereum is just awesome, like in every sense of the word. But because it is still based on proof of work, and because it's dealing with these fundamental limits of communication, when you have arbitrary people transmitting information, it's stuck with this 12 and a half second limit. And because of that, right now, due to the awesome adoption that Ethereum is seeing, a single message costs $12 to $30 to send.
Right.
And that basically rules out almost every kind of use case, right? Most of my Venmo transactions are under 30 bucks, right? So for normal humans, it quickly became kind of too expensive.